All right, so now that I've talked a little bit about the level design of Megaman X8 and how it's kind of flawed, I want to also dig into an aspect of just how the characters are built and how that kind of influences aspects of the way the levels are designed, but also just the way that the game works and why there's some flaws there. So to begin, we already have a little bit of a lattice work for each character, even Axel, even though he's only existed in one game before this one, and the game was kind of bad. But, Mega Man X is based off of Mega Man's that came before him. Zero is based off of Zeros that came before him. And Axel is based off of himself, but also Bass from the Mega Man and Bass series, as both of them have the omnidirectional, or rather eight-way aim functionality. Now, one of the things is, since all three of these characters are existing in the same game, it means that whatever game plan they're playing has to work. And so, when I talked a little bit earlier about the fact that you have some beat 'em up style sections in this game, where there's several points where you'll be locked in a room and they'll say kill all the enemies or you can't get out, and so you have to destroy the enemies. And this is typically something that you do in a beat 'em up, because in a beat 'em up the engagement is specifically killing the enemies. But remember, this is a jump and shooter, so the engagement is specifically in platforming, and then shooting informs that platforming engagement. And so immediately we have an issue there. And so if you want to get around that, then the characters have to be designed such that you're able to derive engagement from killing enemies in that way. I mean, if you're stuck on, yes, we have to have these scenes where you're blowing up a whole bunch of people all at once. So this is where one of the cardinal flaws is, because X, Axel, and Zero are built to be platforming characters. They're not built to be beat 'em up characters. Zero is the one who is closest to that, but even he is structured such that structured more so that he doesn't hone in on an enemy and focus on killing them as much as he kills them quickly and then you move on. And that's the general thing for a game that's about getting from point A to point B. The combat generally has to be kind of quick. It has to be where you do it and you're pretty much, if you end up dealing with one enemy, it's not going to take you more than a half second, if you're good. And if it's like a really, really tough enemy, then, it's probably going to be like 3 seconds, maybe five. Maybe five. If it takes any longer than that, the player is probably going to get a little bit frustrated. But anyway, so, first you have X, right? So he's built with the pea shooter and the charged weapons, of course, right? And the idea is that if you're a patient sort of person who's willing to hold on to that charge button whenever you're doing stuff, and you're thinking ahead a little bit. I mean, it's a minor bit of thinking ahead, but it is thinking ahead. Then you are rewarded with the ability to get past enemies much more quickly, where you just go boom, pow, and most small enemies just die, and so you don't even lose any momentum. And for the bigger enemies, if you start with a charge shot and then mash on the lemons, the plasma bullets, you'll usually be able to keep your motion up because you'll have put out enough damage that they just die. That's not always the case. Sometimes you are forced to deal with the enemy and their patterns. But again, that's kind of how that works. But anyway, there's another. So that's X's design, and one of the other things with X, because he's inheriting something from X4. that was implemented in all the ones after that as well, which is specifically he can use his special weapons while still using his standard buster. And this is actually one of the general flaws in his design, is the special weapons he gets are just terrible in X8. Most of them don't really feel like they have a good use, and it doesn't really feel like there's a reason to really use them when you've got your buster. Some of them are just actively terrible, like the sunflower's attack, which basically shoots a singular firework up, which then splits into 6 fireworks. And the thing is that this weapon doesn't even have the utility that, say, the upward fire did in X4, where it's fast enough that if an enemy is directly above you, you just snipe them. You kill them. This one is slow to start, slow to explode, and that 6-way angle is just really awkward to do anything with. And so it's just a bad move. And there are a number of, like, pretty much there's very few good attacks for X outside of his buster. And of course, when we're talking about X, we also have to talk about his armors, which actually is a strong point in this game, I will say. The concept of actually having mix and match armor parts, honestly, I think that was a long time coming. I mean, we saw something like that in Megaman X3 with the chip system, but that the system was not. I don't think it was implemented quite as well as it could have been. And, with X8, I feel like they actually did a really good job with the concept of, you've got the Hermes armor and the Icarus armor, and you can mix and match the pieces. And if you have all the pieces of the Hermes armor, you become Tron Man Blue. And if you have all the pieces of the Icarus armor, you become Tron Man Red, which I just appreciate I appreciate that color coding. And of course, you also have the ultimate armor, but that's more of a secret thing. But at the end of the day, this is, Mega Man X, this is his game. So it's kind of it's more built around him. But again, X's play, the way that X is built, he's not made for getting into a scenario where you've got a bunch of enemies to kill for that to be interesting. There's also the fact that the way that the enemies are built, they're more platformer style enemies. They're things that you can pretty much kill pretty quickly, or if they're not easily killable, you can't really maneuver around them. They are specifically an obstacle in your way. And that's counter to how you would build a enemy that needs to be beaten up, where you want to be able to navigate around them and use positioning to effectively deal with them. And that's not really just with the way that these games are built, and just how the enemy mobs work, and the fact that it's touch the enemy and take damage. I mean, there's a bunch of paradigms here that make it really difficult for that to work. So anyway, that's X, and X is serviceably implemented in the game. He's serviceably implemented. It's really that the game itself is kind of goes against the grain of what his game should be built like, and that's where the flaw with his design being superimposed upon the design of X8 comes from. So now we move on to Zero, who, like I said, he's the character that's closest to a fighting game character, to a beat 'em up character. He's got combos, he's got cancel tricks, he's got extra special moves and things, but that's really just kind of a veneer thing, because the other aspect of being in a beat 'em up, it also has to deal with how your enemies are designed. And like I said before, with X, the enemies are platformer enemies. So rarely do you have the ability to actually update their position with one of your attacks, which is a big thing when you're in beat 'em up and things, where you want to make space for yourself because you're dealing with a bunch of enemies at once, so you have to kind of control that. Additionally, they don't they rarely ever actually react to your attacks. If they're going to do a thing, they're just going to do it. You're not really going to interrupt them, which again, that's another thing when you're in beat 'em ups, having the ability to attack and use that as an interdiction. That's another thing, and that's something we don't have here. So of course we can't do that. And I know I'm harping on this a lot, but it's something. It's one of those things that's just like no other X game does this, and no other X game does those beat 'em up rooms, and I just want to hammer home why. So all of that design space is not really hit. And just to hammer it home a little bit more, I am going to use a comparison here to also explain why Zero isn't quite a beat 'em up character. He's very close, and really it does come down to how his enemies are designed that makes him not able to do that. So Kirby Superstar Saga. This was a game that basically implemented a bunch of fighting game and beat 'em up concepts into a platformer. Basically, whenever Kirby got a copy ability, he basically became a fighting game character. He gained 5 to 6 different moves that he could implement with different button combinations, and those moves would have different functionalities. Sometimes he'd be able to grab an enemy and throw them. Other times he'd blow them away. Other times he'd just do raw damage. He had a whole bunch of different things that he could do. But in those games, the way that the enemies are designed is such that when you hit them, they react to you hitting them most of the time. Additionally, a lot of enemies can actually stick around a little bit more than you would expect. Like they teeter on the line of having just enough HP that you get to have fun with. You get to be a little bit creative with how you dispatch them, but they still have a small enough HP that it's like a half second to a second at most to deal with any individual enemy. And that's to say nothing of the mid bosses, which of course have their own little thing going on, and they're again built around more of a fighting game dynamic. Although they still have, like, the enemies in that game still do have the if you touch me you take damage, but again Kirby's built to be able to deal with that. So Zero, by comparison, one of the big things that he doesn't have. And I kind of mentioned this with X, and this actually follows pretty much all of the characters in X8. He doesn't have any crowd control, not really. The closest thing he has is breaking shield, which admittedly that's something that you would want in a beat 'em up, but it's just not there. But I mean, it's not enough to actually warrant implementing themes like that in this game. So. I digress. I know I've gone off on a long tangent here, but with Zero's design, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of flaws. So obviously we have the first thing is that he's probably one of the characters that is best suited to playing through the game. I mean, the game is made for X, but Zero just does really well because you can put out a bunch of damage as soon as you get near to an enemy. And his weapon gains are actually pretty good. I like the idea of him getting a bunch of different weapons. I remember back when Megaman X5 was released, I was trundling the forums, and I had posted a thing like, wouldn't it be cool if when Mega Man gets his armors, Zero gets his weapons? I was very vindicated when I saw that they did that in the Mega Man Zero series and also in the Mega Man X8. I don't think Capcom actually listened to me, mind you. Rather, I feel like that was just kind of a natural direction to go in, where Zero doesn't really change its appearance, but it makes sense that he picks up different weapons, especially since all of his action techniques are. It's implied that it's more of a thing that he figures out how to do this thing based on what he saw the other person do. So, at any rate, So, you know, Zero, the weapons that Zero gets are actually pretty good. In fact, I mean, well, I should say, one of them is too good, and then the others are kind of, I mean, they're not as good as the Z-Saber, and so they're just kind of like, well, I'll use the Z-Saber instead. The one that's too good is the Z-Glaive, and that's just because once you get Shuenbu, I think, which is basically a move where he spins in the center of the screen and puts out a hitbox. When he's got the glaive, he basically covers almost the entirety of the screen and just kills whatever is in his way. It's patently broken, and it is actually game warpingly so. So, I mean, granted, the way that I tend to play games, I limit myself a little bit. But I think for the average player, they're just kind of like, oh, I got this. Win button! So, I mean, that move was patently broken, and the enemies are not designed to be able to deal with something like that. So, Zero gets a free pass on certain stages. And again, when we get to the beat 'em up concepts, it's like he has that move. So there's no engagement. There's not really that much engagement in those scenes. So, that's Zero, and he still kind of works. But again, looking at the level structure and then looking at the character, there's we can see that there's a bit of a mismatch here, and this is where the flaw comes out. So then now we get to Axel. So there's a couple of things about Axel, about his design. So Axel is the marriage of a Contra character with a Contra character with a Mega Man character. Because the Contra character, the whole idea is that you run forward and you keep shooting, and you can aim in all directions as you go, and it's don't stop, just go. To take a line from Leo's theme of Guilty Gear Xrd. Guilty Gear Strive, not Xrd. Xrd doesn't have lyrics. Yeah, it's that idea of just run forward, keep shooting. But because Mega Man doesn't have the same pace as, say, Contra, which, Contra is definitely, Contra and Metal Slug, they're both very much a keep going forward. You feel, it doesn't feel right not to move forward. And in the Mega Man series, there are points where, you gotta stop, you gotta think, okay, what am I gonna do now? Unless you're speedrunning the game, but, that's speedrunning, different paradigm. So Axel, in light of this, there's a thing with the way that he works that makes it, I'm not going to say it's awkward, it's just, I think there's a better implementation that could have been done, which is specifically, because he's based off of bass, right, in the original Mega Man and Forte, and I'd have to go back and play that game to make sure I fully remember how he works. But the basic deal, aim in all 8 directions. He can fire, and he can fire rapid fire shots. And so that's a general paradigm, and it kind of makes sense when you superimpose it on so X does single hits and charge shots. Axel does rapid fire shots, but he can aim in all directions. And one of the things is when you're going to aim, to make sure that you can actually aim in any direction, your movement stops. So this is kind of an issue when you're looking at how the Mega Man games are supposed to work, where if you know what you're doing, you don't have to stop. You just kind of keep going. But with Axel, there's kind of, I'd almost say, a bit of a stuttery way of movement with him, particularly if you're shooting in the air, because you're going to stop your momentum and then aim in whatever direction you need to. At least that's how I remember it anyway. I know I'll probably be proven wrong as soon as I play the game and be like, oh man, I lied to you all. But anyway, that's how I remember it. And there's another thing with the way that he is built, because remember, we have those shield break things. So X beats them with his charge shots. Zero beats them with the last hit of his combos or with the powerful heavy hit that he gets from a particular enemy, a particular boss, I should say. But Axel, the way that he does it is his 8th bullet, I believe, it's either his 8th or 9th bullet, is a different color, and that bullet breaks guard. So, whereas X, if he's prepared beforehand, can immediately break a guard. Because he just, he's already got the charge when he comes into the scene, so the enemy shows up, he goes, bam, guard's broken, now I can mash on the lemons and throw some damage. Zero can fairly quickly get to the last hit of his combo, and then once he gets the heavy hit, then he just goes, just breaks it open. Axel, on the other hand, until he gets a special weapon, he can't do it quickly. He has to go da 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 da. So it's say like a second and a half, maybe close to that, just to get the guard broken. And so that harms the pace and the design. It's interesting because when you look at that element of Axel's design, it echoes the rest of the design of X8, where you have to give up some element of your pace and some element of your control to actually play through the game properly. And so, I mean, once you get a weapon attack that allows you to break the guard, it goes a bit faster, but base kit, Axel can't do that quickly. And so that's a little bit of a harmful thing. Now, granted, you have the swapping system, so it's less harmful to him as a character. And, I mean, being able to aim in all directions is kind of cool and stuff, but at the end of the day, I kind of feel like of the 3 characters, I feel like Axel kind of loses out a little bit more because he doesn't get burst damage, really. And if I were to do an implementation to kind of at least fix the guard break thing to make it so that Axel can actually on command go, I'm going to break this guard. I would do something like I would do a magic timing sort of thing, where if you stop firing for a little bit, if you stop firing for maybe like a half second or something, so you go up, then you can fire out a block breaking shot. Now I think there'd have to be some. I realize like off the top it's probably broken in its initial concept, but that would at least allow him to break guard as quickly as X or Zero can, and would also make it so that he can, if he's got a little bit of time, if he's got a little bit of forethought, he can actually just do it, which is the thing. He can do it on command if you're thinking about it. That would be the implementation. Now the other implementation is not tenable for the game because the other 2 characters use face buttons. And so you probably already know what I'm going to say here is if he's going to be aiming in all directions, let him aim in all directions while moving. So make him a twin sticker. Put his shot buttons on the shoulders, and put his shot buttons on the shoulders so you can use both of your thumbs, one to move and one to shoot, one to aim. And you probably have to put the jump button on the shoulder too, which is a little bit weird. I'm not gonna lie. But that's that feels like that might be a necessity there. I mean, the other angle would be just making sure that you have means and methodologies of locking into different aiming paradigms. So you could do like the Metroid implementation. Well, really, Metroid Dread did I think Metroid Dread is a masterclass in how to handle aiming in all directions, from animation to sticks, to how you use your stick, to how you superimpose the face buttons and the shoulder buttons with regards to that whole thing. So At any rate, yeah, I think there were some flaws in Axel's design, and I mean a part of it is he's not nearly as baked as the rest of the characters because X and Zero have had so many iterations to get it right. So anyway, that's kind of just looking at how the characters are kind of built and some of the flaws in them. And like I said, just to kind of just to kind of recap, X is X. He does what he does. His armors are really cool. His weapons are trash. Axel is Axel is pretty flawed from certain functional spaces that make him a little bit awkward. And I haven't even talked about his copy ability, which I don't really. It's a non-factor from a play standpoint. It's just for things. I mean, like it's funny because I referenced Kirby for combat and enemy design if you really want to do beat 'em up stuff. But I mean, I'm going to reference Kirby again for for enemy design and ability design if you really want to have your character be a copy dude. Because I mean, it's right there. That is how you do it. Is you give your character a number of options, or at least one very clear defining option that they can pick up from enemies. You make sure that there's a variety of different things that you can pick up from enemies, because that's a part of the whole idea of copying, is that you've got a buffet of abilities and you want to taste all of them. It's not even necessarily a thing of finding the most useful one, although that's fun, but it's just getting to see all of them. And that concept, that form of engagement is not there with Axel when it comes to things, because there's only certain enemies that you can copy, and the enemies that you copy are not fun to play as, and the abilities that you get from them are just bleh, just no. And I suppose a part of this is because he's working off of the same weapon gain idea that Mega Man X and Zero are, so he's already gaining other weapons. And so it probably felt weird to then, on top of that, give him more stuff that he can do. But I I kind of feel like that's what you would need to do to really make him stand out, and for the fact that he's supposed to be that kind of guy. He's supposed to be able to replicate things and be whatever he wants. It's not really expressed in the play of the character. What's expressed in the play of the character is that he's a gun kata's guy, Um, you know, um, Equilibrium, or Nuns with Guns, because almost all of them are implemented in that same fashion. Um, but yeah, that's the thing. There's Axel needs to bake a little bit more, and there's again what we saw with the other two characters. We also see this with Axel, where there's elements of how the game is designed that make it so that the implementation of the character doesn't work as well as it could, and it feels a little off. And so that's one of the flaws that I would highlight with regards to X8. So to kind of wrap this up, because I've basically hit the main things that I wanted to talk about with regards to the flaws of X8 primarily from a mechanical standpoint. Like from an art direction standpoint, yeah, it needed to cook a little bit more. I can kind of no, I can't really give them a pass on that, because we at the time there were already other things that had figured out how to do a 3D design of the characters well. And if anything, it's probably, in my opinion, I think one of the issues was that they stayed too faithful to the 2D designs. I think they needed to experiment a little bit more and build something that just felt a little more um, felt better in that space. But it's also just the color choice. It's a little bit muted. The everything feels softer than it should be from the edging, from the edges of stuff, and like it feels like there's this marriage between kind of this drab feeling that you would expect, well, kind of expect from an X Games. In reality, the X Games have some fairly vibrant coloration. It's just a little more saturated, and a little deeper valued. Um, but it's like you've got some color choices, some hue choices that you would more expect from a Mega Man, just a normal Mega Man game. But then the value and saturation choices are closer to that of X, and it just kind of it feels weird. It looks a little weird when I look at it. So, and I mean, it's kind of a nitpicky thing, but just the art style, I think it needed a couple more passes, in my opinion. And yeah, so there's that refinement layer stuff with regard to the game. The item system was passable, was serviceable. I mean, it did what it needed to do. It might have been a little bit too grindy. I don't really feel like I feel like your average player doesn't want to have to go through a level again after they've beaten it in the Mega Man X game, particularly if they're doing multiple runs. That's not really the feeling of it, you know. So having them have to grind to get stuff doesn't really work in that paradigm, in my opinion. And then you also have I keep on wanting to call them the call girls, and I know that's a terrible thing to call them, but the you have the communicators, the operators, and you have like three different ones, and they all talk to you differently. And thankfully, they avoid the issue that they had in X5, where the character would just interrupt play, and you'd have to wait for them to finish talking to you, or you mash the button to get through it as fast as you can, and then get back to playing. So they avoided that by doing the whole hey listen, the there's a thing, if you want to listen to it, just push the button thing. And the three operators, there's one of them is like eminently more useful than the rest of them, because the first one is basic tutorial girl. So you're like, this is the stage, watch out for spikes. Oh, this is the stage, and they do this, and watch out for that. And so it's a, I guess you could say it's the entry level character who's just like, if you can't figure out what's going on, talk to me. Which I feel is a little, I'm not going to say it's disrespectful to the player, but it's one of those things where generally speaking, the design is supposed to speak for itself when it comes to platformers. If you have to tell the player what's going on, you need to take it through a couple more passes usually. Now, with the second one, it's boss information, and I think it was Lair was her name. Like the first one was Alia, and then you have Lair, and her stuff. I mean, it's fine, I guess. Um, I'm used to just kind of banging my head against the bosses to figure out what their weaknesses are and how to deal with them. So having a character who just says, "This is how you beat them," I mean that's fine. That's fine. And then you have Lynette. Lynn, I forget. I just remember she was over designed visually, um, like robo pigtail, a blonde robo pigtail, not quite lolly girl, just young, um, green dress girl. with a ray gun if you decide to play as her, because you could play as the operators. But she's the most useful of them because she tells you where the secrets are, and that's like the most useful bit of information that you can get in a Mega Man X game. Next to, yeah, no, that is the most useful information that you can, most useful hidden information that you can get in an X game. Is this is where the thing is, and this might be how you get it. And I know some players just, won't use her because they want to figure it out on their own, and I think that makes sense. And the fact that you have the option to not use her makes sense. But yeah, and they also thankfully gave you the option to just go it alone, no operator. And I think that is how I think most players would prefer to go. So yeah, that's X8. As I said, I think it's a little bit flawed as a game. Overall, the big thing is the pacing is off. There's too many points where the player's ability to progress is controlled in some way, shape, or fashion. And so the player has to either wait or is forced to run, or forced to move. And that I don't like that for how the game is designed. I feel like that's counter to how Mega Man generally works, and it does that too often. If it's once in a blue moon, that's great. That's fine. It's a nice little extra flavoring. But 5 out of 8 levels is too many times to do that. So you have that. It inexplicably tries to do some beat 'em up tropes without actually doing the work to make those fun. And the characters, because all of the characters exist in the same game, them having to all deal with the same obstacles in different ways, I think there was another design pass that needed to happen on each of the characters to make sure that it was engaging to do so. So yeah, that's what I have to say about the game from a mechanical standpoint. I'm going to stop recording so I don't break my memory again. Thank you for listening to this podcast from Vernacular Games. I'm Redcoat, founder of Vernacular Games. If you'd like to see some of the other things that we have done, you can check out our game, Highway to the Moon, on Steam and itch.io. It is a scrolling shoot 'em up with 8-directional, or rather omnidirectional aiming, and some interesting little shenaniganry going on. We also have Legends of Mathmatica Squared, a tongue-in-cheek RPG, well, classical style RPG, with math puns galore, puzzle dungeons, and an active time battle system. In addition, we've also released a children's storybook called The Fairy and the Dragon. We did this in partnership with Inertia Productions and their author and the lead author, Jeffrey Morgan. You can find that book on BookBaby, also Amazon, but you might have a hard time finding it there. Additionally, we are working with a client to get a card game out into the world. It is called Record Biz. The client, in particular, Brian Garrett, he is actually a member of the record business, and he wanted to impart his knowledge to the world. And what better way to do that than with a game? And so that is the mission, let's say. So it's building a card game that kind of operates a little like Monopoly. It's got a lot more agency than Monopoly does, if I'm honest, and allows you to take up the mantle of a record tycoon and deploy your mans out to different performance venues and record songs and make money off of those song assets. So it's a nice thing. It's a really cool thing. If you want to try that, if you want to check that game out when it comes out, we've got a waiting list that's going to be underneath this channel, underneath this video, that you can just click on it, go there, get on the list, and then as soon as new things come out, we will let you know. It'll be great. It'll be great. Now, with that out of the way, there are other things that Vernacular Games is working on. However, it's been a bit of a slog of a year, I'll be honest. But hopefully, we'll have things to announce to you in the coming months. But until then, you've got me as a talking head to listen to. Hi. So, without further ado, this is Redcoat, signing off. Play the games you want to play, boyos. Also like and subscribe!